Hello there, this is Josh Palmer from Jaw Movies. Recently, we released a bunch of unreleased, unfinished content as narrated scripts or stories, etc. on Jaw Movies. I'd like to refer to this as the Jaw Movies Unfinished Collection. Um, a lot of these short stories, might seem kind of puzzling. Like, what is this? Why is this coming out? Especially since a lot of these are just kind of like almost fan fictions. Um, a lot of these are just short stories I had written or made over the years. A lot of them when I was younger, that obviously never got finished or never saw the light of day in any form or fashion for various reasons. I'm preparing to step back from the creative space in the coming future. We've got a couple more projects on the horizon, but for the most part, I'm preparing to step back, and a lot of this was just kind of releasing stuff that I knew I'd never do anything else with otherwise, so it was a way to kind of get it out there. But obviously, some of my audience members might have questions or, I guess, curiosities about what these projects were. So I thought I would take it project by project and break it down and explain briefly what these were and the history behind them, so that way there's a fuller context and understanding when putting the pieces together of what exactly the unfinished collection is. The first stories were the Mr. Potato Head short stories. When I was younger, I had to guess these were probably about 2006, 2008 era. I was really into Mr. Potato Head, and I told a couple short stories about him. There's really not much more to it than that. I was a fan of Mr. Potato Head, and that clearly kind of influenced in my work and things I did, creatively speaking. The race car story is similar to the Mr. Potato Head stories. I was big into cars when I was younger, and I told a small little short story about the main characters. And that's really all there is to it. There's not much more substance to this. This is barely, 100 words to the whole story? The next was actually the first unfinished story on this little collection. This is my Magic Treehouse story I attempted to write. I have no recollection of what I was intended to do with this, what story I wanted to tell, if I was just adapting something or telling my own story. This was the furthest I got. This was a 2008 era story, and that's all that exists, and all that remains is all that we have that's actually been on that published video. The Penguins of Madagascar. This is probably my first big step into creative storytelling. Obviously, if you're familiar with the Penguins of Madagascar show and you've read through my script I wrote, these are pretty much just adaptations of episodes from the show. I was really into the show when it came out, and I wanted to write it looks like a play by the looks of it, that I could perform with various classmates for the remainder of the class that wasn't actually in it. It never got performed, but there was, I wrote all these out, and there was talk of it for probably a good month at school. In a way, it was kind of poetic and nice to get to do something with this after, 15, 16 years of nothing happening with it. Rudolph versus Cutie. This was the first Rudolph and Quack story I ever told. This actually predates the 2009 film that I made. So this was just pretty much me wanting to, hey, I wanted to tell a story about Rudolph and Quack, and that was it. There's not much to it. Obviously, this is a complete story, thankfully. This isn't unfinished like some of the other Rudolph and Quack stories that we'll get to later on. But this is canonically, if we're looking at it like that, not connected to the 2009 film, the 2014 canceled film, Tales from the Machine of the Past, etc. Like, this is its own isolated little story with Rudolph and Quack. The Mystery Club stories. In elementary school, me and some friends, among them actually including Chris Yackerson from Nuclear Films, and an old colleague of ours, Zach Baker, who we worked with on a couple of early short films. These stories were just about me and my friends, including them, in our little club we formed called the Mystery Club, and just little short stories or whatever, just telling creative stories. Obviously, if you're familiar with franchises and IPs like Percy Jackson or especially Ice Age, you'll see lots of parallels, and I think it's pretty clear that this was just me kind of taking stories I loved and putting myself and my friends as characters in these stories or these situations, which is funny because considering this is from 2009, seeing that was something that I would do, it's very interesting to see how that would later play out in various other stories I would tell down the road, such as my Lego Rebel life. So the My Haunted Story. This was pretty much just a school Halloween project around fourth grade. Um, you'll notice out of all these that this is the only one that's actually written in the first person. The reason why was because while several of these stories, such as the Mystery Club's stories, were written in kind of a mix of first person, third person, etc. This was the only one that I had to eliminate a decent chunk of what was written to change it to a third person. So that's why this one is left in first person. But just like the Mystery Club stories and several other things, you'll see some of the incorporation of familiar IPs, such as at this time it would have been the Percy Jackson. So that's pretty much all the My Haunted Story was, is just a simple write a Halloween story in school around Halloween time. So the Halloween future. This is kind of similar to the My Haunted Story, except this was my next grade. This would have been fifth grade this was from. Obviously, you can see that, once again, there was an incorporation of a familiar IP. This time, though, it would have been Back to the Future, with one of the two drawings literally incorporating a drawing that was done in Back to the Future Part 2. There seemed to be kind of a mix of the elements of Back to the Future Part 2 and 3. A franchise that definitely I was very much into around this time. Otherwise, as you could also tell, this is an unfinished story. I have no idea if I ran out of time and just never finished telling it, or if I did and finished telling it, it was just, the pages were lost. The pages were it was like stapled together long way, so I had like 3 pages, stapled together this way. And they were folded so that they would fit in this little box of papers, etc. And there's no fold after the third page, whereas the first and second pages had fold marks on the top and the bottom. So I'm guessing this is all that was written, but yeah, that's all this is. The 39 Clues story, I believe this was either 2011 or 2012. This was actually, I don't know if I wrote the script beforehand or afterhand, but this script, we shot what was on this script. I shot it with my sister at my grandparents' house during our summer break. Whatever happened to that footage, I don't know. I must have deleted it, or perhaps maybe the camera didn't record. I don't remember. But unfortunately, this is all that remains, which it's unfortunate. If I had that footage, I would actually release that. I think that would be kind of cool, considering that was a 2011 era attempt at a live-action short film of sorts. But I don't remember what story I was trying to tell with this. Obviously, this is kind of a fan fiction of the 39 Clues IP. Like the Magic Treehouse, I don't know where I was intending to go with this, but this one scene is what exists, and that's how it'll ever be. So, the Rudolph and Quack book. I do not believe at this point in time there were intentions to tell a Rudolph and Quack movie again or another story. I believe that was later down the road in 2013. I could be wrong, but that's my guess. Either way, though, this was an attempt at, we had these little booklets. I was helping out at a summer school program with my grandma, and I got a couple of the booklets after making a bunch of them for the various classes. I took a couple for myself to use, and I wanted to write a Rudolph and Quack story, like a full-on book, truly tell the story of Rudolph and Quack. Obviously, I didn't get too far, but since Rudolph and Quack is kind of a staple of Jaw movies, I thought it would be cool to show this, even though it's pretty short and incomplete. And I have no idea what story I was going to take with this, though I have to imagine it's some sort of hybrid between what the 2009 story was and what we ultimately got in the 2013 version of the story. Star Wars Episode ? The Mixed Up Fairy Tale. This is right along those same lines of that Rudolph and Quack book. I got a booklet, one I wanted to use for the Rudolph and Quack book, and the other I wanted to make like a Star Wars comic. And I actually think, in a way, the presentation of this amongst the Jaw Movies Unfinished Collection, I actually think this is kind of cool, doing the visual narrated comic. Obviously, the artwork is rather crude. It was done by 11, 12-year-old me. The story, I have to imagine, based off this, is just going to be a mixed up version of A New Hope, you know. But I do kind of like how this is basically like, you know, getting creative with the franchise, just telling my own little, you know, fan fiction in a sense, similar to kind of what like Rebuild the Galaxy has done nowadays with Star Wars. So I thought that was kind of cool and fun. A unique premise. Animal Crossing Bricks 5000. Around this time, this was 2012, I was really heavily into the Animal Crossing franchise. And I wanted to tell my own Animal Crossing story. What I intended to do with this, no idea. My guess is just a loose adaptation of the basic synopsis of the game. I don't know. I don't remember much other than just I wrote this little snippet and that's that. But you know, it's definitely, I think my writing had improved by the time I got to this point compared to earlier stories. Obviously, there was still much more progress to go. As far as being a competent writer, but I think it was interesting, the writing style, comparing this to the Mystery Club stories, for example, which were heavily modified. The Rudolph and Quack origin story, I have no idea actually when this was created. This could have been anywhere from 2009 to 2013. I don't know if this came before or after what I started doing in the book. Obviously, there's some similar overlap, but the very little that was done. But, you know, it's short and sweet, and I thought, what the heck? It's Rudolph and Quack. I started writing it. Let's get it out there. I have no idea where I intended to take this. I'm guessing by this point, I'm guessing it came after the Rudolph book because there's no allusion to Great Depression, and there's none of that in the 2013 story. So I'm assuming this was further along that line, but yeah, that's all there is to it. So the Rudolph and Quack movie story treatment. This was obviously, a lot of this came from 2013, maybe a little bit in 2012. This was kind of the story treatment for what was going to be the remake of Rudolph and Quack. And for those of you who follow the channel and follow Jaw Movies, you'll know that a lot of these story elements appeared in the Tales of the Machine of the Past short film. And that's pretty much as it is. Maybe someday the Rudolph and Quack story will get told, but obviously it has been told in the Tales from the Machine of the Past, but I thought since the movie ultimately got canceled, it would be cool to kind of put out what the story treatment was going to be for it and what was ultimately supposed to be the plot of that story. A New Sith Arisen. It's self-explanatory. It's a Star Wars fan fiction. It was a story I kind of started telling with various action figures I had, but you know what? I thought it was a really cool story, so I started writing it down, and I saved all those notes apparently, so I thought, what the heck, why not? Let's include it with this Jaw Movies Unreleased connection. This has no connection to Galactic Conflict, Galaxy War, My Lego Rebel, any of that. It's a completely owned, just little Star Wars fan fiction told by a child, essentially, but it's interesting if you really look at it. You could see various elements that did kind of come through later on, such as an Imperial Remnant and a Darth Baka type character, which we see in the Galaxy War backstory. There's also the character of Muscle Man, who comes up to play in both Galactic Conflict and is part of the Galaxy War timeline, even though he didn't actually appear in any of the told stories. So I thought it was kind of cool just for that sake. It's kind of unique, this idea of Ahsoka Tano falling to the dark side and, getting her legs cut off or whatever, basically a Darth Maulified Ahsoka Tano. But obviously there's so many inconsistencies with Star Wars. It is so clearly just a fan fiction by a kid. The Dysfunctional Werewolf Family sequel. So this one is rather crude and profane, and for that I apologize. But do know that this was not something I wrote in the last year. This was something I wrote 10 years ago. So that's why there is a lot of questionable story choices made there, especially in the dialogue. But overall, it was taking the elements of the puppet show, The Dysfunctional Werewolf Family, to its extreme. I don't believe I intended to do anything with this other than just write it for fun and show a couple of my friends who I made The Dysfunctional Werewolf Family with. Last but not least, we get to Galactic Conflict. We're going to talk about the second one first. Obviously, I've already talked about the second one before. We did a documentary explaining what Galactic Conflict 2 was, and I've shown off those finished scenes, but just to briefly summarize, it was an attempt to remake Galaxy War, and it was never finished, but before shooting and scrapping the project, there was kind of work done on what the rest of the Galactic Conflict timeline would be. And so I thought it was interesting to kind of publish these, since I didn't realize this, but I had a full-on script for the third one, and I know I had a script for the second one, but I decided, yeah, let's put that out there. So even though there were shot scenes for this, and those have been available on John Movies for 8 years or so, now you could see the completed intended script. And as you could see, especially once you get to the second half of it, there were differences with Galaxy War, and ultimately the way Galactic Conflict 2 ended up and Galaxy War ended up definitely paved the way for different stories, as we'll see when we get to Galactic Conflict 3. Galactic Conflict 3 was obviously my initial continuation of Galaxy War and Galactic Conflict in that plot line, and it's really interesting to look at, because when I first created that Galaxy War, it was like, what is this? What do I do with this? And so obviously it was like, well, and I've been open about this, I had issues with Galaxy War, etc., and I wanted to remake it, so I wrote out the script, and we were going to film it by a script, etc. And then it was like, okay, well, what do I do next? And Galactic Conflict was kind of the first iteration of what I was doing next with that, this third script. Obviously, it was unfinished, and this is very much something I kind of planned out with, using action figures to kind of tell the story. And it's very much something, even I remember just back when I was writing this, it was like, I wonder how I'm going to do this, like a General Tam, a Tarkin, like stormtroopers, how are we doing this? And obviously the story never got finished, and then when time came to actually make a follow-up to what was Galaxy War 2, we ended up making the Galaxy War short Evolutions, and which now is Galaxy War 2, initially was Galaxy War 3, and then obviously Galactic Conflict just got scrapped from that point. So if you watch the Galactic Conflict 3 narrated story, you will see that, the script was never finished. There's no the end like there was with Galactic Conflict 2, but I did have a story treatment that I jotted down and then was writing a script based off of. So I thought, since the script was ultimately never finished, let's put the story treatment out there, and then, at least the story could be finished even if the script itself was not. And I wouldn't have put the story treatment out if I actually finished the script, but like I said, it was the way to kind of complete that story. So that is the John Movies unreleased collection. Obviously, there's some other stuff in there, like some songs. That's just kind of cringe, but you know what? Put it out. There's talent there underneath. I believe there's, some sort of potential there, and who knows? Maybe someday someone with actual talent will see that and go, yeah, you know what? Let's do something with that. And that's really the case with a lot of these stories. Maybe there's something there, maybe not. At the end of the day, it's just a way to kind of do a send-off and put a little bow on my era of creative storytelling, especially since a lot of this was younger. As far as for future plans on John Movies, there are some books in the works. There may be another short film, a small little just simple passion project. We'll see. But continue to stay tuned to John Movies. There may be a wind down coming, but the end is not near yet. So stay tuned, and I thank you for your guys' continued support over 15 years of John Movies and my storytelling.